As a business leader, you often have to persuade others. This video describes a technique for encouraging them to persuade themselves. First of all, allow me to start by saying I am far from an expert. I maybe learned about this 6 months ago, but in truth, I barely know anything about it, only that I think it's so valuable and so useful, especially in terms of leadership, where it is not yet being utilized, that I just want to essentially introduce it to anybody who watches my videos, because I think it's super useful because of the technique and because it actually instead of trying to use evidence to persuade people, which especially all by itself basically almost never works, but also it helps people decide for themselves whether they're satisfied. So it's far more persuasive for them, and it gets better outcomes for both of you. So it produces better mutual outcomes by not pushing when you are needing to persuade or change people's mind. And this is especially important for leaders, because whether it's your reports, your employees, up and coming business partners, strategic partners, there is always some aspect of what you're doing where they have to be on board, because if they don't buy in, it almost never works. That's why change management efforts usually fail. So because I am basically new to this area and I'm introducing it not as an expert, I am enthusiastic about any feedback you have, so you can reach out to me and contact me through the email address. I'll put it in the description, but it's also should be in the link or inside the video under my channel if you're on YouTube. And if not, reach out to me, drop something in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Thanks. So essentially what it comes down to is there's rarely ever any difference and any differentiation between business development or people in business and people sort of unto themselves. That is, people talk about personal development and business development as though, oh, well, I do personal development. That has nothing to do with business development, and business development has nothing to do with personal development. Well, until the robots take over, until the Terminator series becomes real and Skynet takes over, it's always personal development. It just happens to be that it is in the context of business, but let's be honest, for most of us, business takes up the majority of at least our weekdays. So 40 plus hours a week. So there's no point on separating them. And that's why this technique is valuable, because essentially what it's based on is persuasion in the context usually of counseling. But the reason I think it's brilliant is because that's not the only place it's useful, right? So right now I'm reading this great book that talks about this false distinction called Good Authority, written by Jonathan Raymond. I would recommend it, but it talks about how there is no distinction between personal and business development, and how supporting people, especially your reports, helping them develop themselves as people, is virtually always also beneficial for the culture of the organization, because they feel taken care of and cared about. So as I said, this video is essentially an introduction to something, and the something is called motivational interviewing, oftentimes shortened as MI. And it's essentially, as I said, about how to persuade people to persuade themselves, especially when doing things which are sort of mutually beneficial between yourself and the other party. So motivational interviewing, and this is a definition that I'll put the link either here and or in the description to where I got this. This is from the University of Massachusetts, and that is: motivational interviewing is a collaborative conversation to strengthen a person's own motivation for and commitment to change. So in this case, of course, change is how are you going to work together? What is it that you want them to do, but will also be beneficial for them? So according to the MI model, it's typically better to start a conversation with letting the other person choose the topic. Of course, in the business context, you're meeting for a reason because you, the leader, are busy. They, the partner or the report, are also busy. So you already have sort of a frame for it. But even so, what you want to do is sort of invoke what is called topic nomination. That is, let them sort of frame the conversation within that already existing context. But even if it was outside of a business meeting of some kind, still encouraging them to talk about what they want to talk about will, by its very definition, give them a lot more buy-in because it's what they care about, and give them that sense of, well, they're interested in what I want to talk about. So that said, it doesn't mean you can't gently steer the conversation, and you should, if you want to make this conversation productive. It's probably beneficial for both of you to steer the conversation, though it may be irrelevant because of the fact that this is in a business setting and this meeting was set for a real reason. Okay, so you can do this though by basically saying, so you want to talk about da da da. So here's some things I was thinking of, and then give them 3 or 4 choices. So let's say, so let's talk about alternative energy in the photovoltaic sector, because I know you're interested in that. Or we could talk about solar energy in a larger context, other types of technologies, alternative energy, battery technology. So what do you want to talk about today? So you give them some topics to choose from. And then when they choose a specific topic, or if they say, well, I don't really want to talk about any of those, or you could end your menu by saying, or if there's something else you'd rather talk about, let's talk about that. You've already framed it as talking about alternative energy, because that's the reason you set the meeting in my example, right? So the core skills of MI are simple, but take some real practice to do. As I said, I've known about MI for about 6 months, but for the most part, I failed to apply it because I'm sort of afraid to get it wrong, yet it's really not rocket science, but it does take practice. So the first of these, there's basically 4 basic skills, and the 4 basic skills are open questions, or WH questions. So who, what, where, when, why, how, which. The other one is affirming. And when we're talking about affirming, this is sort of agreeing with, commenting, or reinforcing things that they talk about. You go, yeah, that's a really interesting point, would be an example of affirming. From a psychology point of view, it is literally reinforcing or rewarding them for talking about something. And that can also help you gently steer the conversation to the things that are of particular interest to you, and honestly just help you stay on topic and make better use of time for both of you. The other one is reflecting. So reflecting is saying, oh yeah, that's a good point you made. So do you think the future is more in PV or in the solar thermal sector? And what implications might that have in terms of how we might want to work together, right? So it's certainly steering the conversation, but it's also, as those subjects comes up, as something of interest comes up, is to either give your own reflections, but in particular, ask them for their reflections or deeper thoughts. So you can go down that path, which is meaningful and brings up topics that you don't necessarily know they're interested in, or of particular value to them in this conversation, right? And then the next one is summarizing. So essentially, this is summarizing important points. Though this typically happens at the end of a conversation, it doesn't only have to happen at the end of a conversation. You could summarize a specific aspect of the topic they just talked about, especially since by doing that, it gives you an opportunity to check your understanding of what you heard from them. So they said something and said, well, I think PV is the real future. And I was like, oh, okay, so you think PV is the real future because of A, B, C, and D. Or no, I think solar thermal is the real future, and here's why. Oh, you think it's the future, but what about this and this? You could even actually challenge them. But the whole point is to mainly say back to them, to paraphrase. It not only shows them that you're listening, but it also checks your understanding. Because remember, you are summarizing what they said rather than what you said. And the idea of, oops, I just about fell off my exercise ball that I sit on. The idea here is to summarize what you said, summarize the whole, to encapsulate the meeting, or to summarize and simultaneously check your understanding of what they said. It gives you an opportunity, or them an opportunity, to correct you if you have any misunderstanding about what they're saying. So it's really powerful. Now, altogether, it is quite famous, at least in MI circles. It's ORS, right? Open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizing, right? So those things together, and keeping that in mind, that is actually not only the core, but almost it's not the entire framework, but it's pretty close. Those things are used throughout a standard motivational interview and therapy, but in this context, in this. So the open questions, honestly, for me at least, is easy, and I think they're easy for anybody. And that is just who, what, why, when, where, how, and which. Of course, how doesn't actually start with WH, but all of those questions invite them to speak more and elaborate. So, like, what do you think the future of solar energy is? Or which of the solar technologies are you most interested in? Or which of the solar technologies is your company working on right now? Right? And then it gives them a chance to fill that in. And the main thing, the main power of WH questions, of open questions, is it encourages them to answer with more than one word and facilitates the continuation of the conversation and topic nomination. Because every time they say something, it's like, well, yeah, we're thinking about getting into solar thermal, but we haven't done it yet because we haven't done the research. It's like, now you have extra information, not only to continue that conversation, but if that's something that your company can provide or partner with them, now you've identified an additional opportunity because you asked an open question. So affirmations is the next one. And as I said, this is basically a type of behavioral reinforcement. It's like, oh yeah, I like what you said there. I appreciate the fact that you're interested in solar thermal, but you're not sure about going ahead with it because you haven't done your research yet. I respect that because I'm kind of a scientific person myself, or I really believe in science and examining things before hopping in because it's so easy just to get excited. Right now, you're not only aligning yourself with them personally, you're telling them you respect them. I think it's really super important when you're affirming, you're not only affirming what they're saying, but if you include yourself in that affirmation somehow outside of that, like, I really respect what you said, I believe the same thing, make it genuine, because intelligent people are pretty good at sniffing out BS. So for ethical reasons and every other reason, keep your life simple. And if you don't mean it, don't say it. Next one is reflections. Well, I've kind of already given an example of that, but what it really allows, as I said, is for both of you to go deeper on that. It's like, I hadn't thought about that, but the mining of lithium itself has environmental impact. I wonder whether there's an opportunity there to improve that, or maybe batteries aren't the solution we need to be thinking of. What do you think? Right. So you reflect on it, or you reflect on what they said, and now you have more of that topic to go through. Now, summarizing is pretty easy, right? It's just what you've talked about. But as you're going through the meeting, you want to be as present and mindful as you can. So you're also selecting the things to summarize that are of most value to your mutual agenda and benefit, so that you focus on that part of the summary. None of us can remember everything. If you think you can, You're either delusional or you're a very exceptional human being, and that's very rare. But by basically not only paying good attention and summarizing, you can also in that way steer the conversation. Now I want to talk about this because it's kind of the elephant in the room of this whole thing. It's like, well, isn't this whole thing manipulative, Tim? Yeah, it is. Here's the reality of that though. Every interaction we have with anybody has an influence, a persuasive element, or a manipulation. Now we can either do this poorly and unintentionally, or well and intentionally. Whatever interaction you have with anybody is having an influence if you are involved in the conversation. But one of the other beauties of motivational interviewing, and especially encouraging them to have them change their mind or consider new facts, is the whole goal is for you to talk less as the motivational interviewer and to have them talk more. But at the same time, yes, this is essentially having them bring up the things that they're interested in, introducing maybe questions or challenging them more towards the end of the conversation to say, well, you talked about PV as being the future. How do you know that PV is the future versus some other alternative? And then they have to reflect on that part for themselves, especially because this conversation that I'm using as the example, I'm all about solar thermal. I don't think PV is the future. I think there's too many problems with it. But simply by saying that, instead of saying PV is wrong, there's a lot of problems with it, and batteries and all sorts of other nonsense, there's another way to do it that's better, and I have the solution. I simply introduce the idea and then let them consider those alternatives without actually saying that. Is it influencing them? Yes, but it's certainly not pushing them. And as I said, we all always influence one another. Another thing you can do, some ways you can sort of do, make your influence very ethical, is to basically do two things. One is declare it explicitly. It's like, hi, thanks for spending your time with me. Today, I hope to convince you that solar thermal really is the future of solar technology. And just leave it at that. Especially if they're a big PV person, right? And they might laugh and say, yeah, whatever, you're never going to convince me. That's cool. That's just sort of my goal today. But, we'll talk about it and see where it goes, right? So you just tell them what your agenda is. The other one is pull what I'm going to call a Dr. Phil. I know people have different feelings about Dr. Phil, but he has some good down-home things to say about how people should conduct themselves that I really respect and agree with, outside of anything else that he might have done or said or other things, which I know very little about actually. So ask yourself, as the person conducting this motivational interview, would my mother be proud of what I'm doing? And if the answer is no, you probably shouldn't be doing it. So, check in with your own ethical code. And if it's not okay, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Would they be okay with the agenda? You could ask that too. Would they be proud or respect my goal for this conversation? Whether they agree or not, would they respect it and be okay for me to have this possibly persuasive conversation with them? If the answer is okay, you're good to go. That's it for Crush It Club 128, Motivational Interviewing for Leaders. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.